We are on 133b, Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, and the Gemara had said that we said that you can do all the needs of a bris on Shabbos. Thank you very much. That it's coming to tell us that you can also do the tzitzin ha'ma'ak when you go back for little fringes that not only the fringes that would make the bris invalid, but even the fringes that are not necessary for the validity of the bris. But nevertheless, since you're in the midst, you can continue and do that, but you cannot go back to it once you've stopped the bris. Well, you've done, and you want to go back and make it nicer. That you cannot do. And the Gemara wanted to compare it to the Carbon Pesach, where Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Breka, says that you only do the minimum of the hefshed, of the skinning of the animal, in order to get the innards out. And the Gemara says, no, you can't compare that, because there, perhaps the reason why he's strict and says you can't do it is because there's no reason to be there's no reason. There's no reason to make it any nicer, because you're in the midst of a mitzvah. That's not the beauty of the mitzvah. But anytime you can make a mitzvah nicer, you need to do so. And the Gemara said the source of that is that you always make a mitzvah nice was from Zeh Keli V'Anveu in the Az Yasher, in the Song of the Sea. We say, this is Hashem, and this is my God, and I will make him my dwelling place. In other words, I will be a source of dwelling for Hashem in this world. That's a simple reading. And the Midrash is Zeh Keli V'Anveu, I will beautify Hashem, meaning the mitzvahs. And this is about the 7th, 8th wide line. Abashal Omer. Va'anveu, that the meaning of Va'anveu doesn't mean I will make his mitzvahs beautiful, but rather what it means is Va'anveu havei domalei. Ani vahu, I and him, we will be similar, and I will emulate the ways of Hashem. Meaning, Mahochanim Barachim, just as he, Hashem, is compassionate and gracious, so too you should be gracious and compassionate. So we cannot compare it to Rabbi Yochanan's case, but rather Amar Ravashi Hamani Rabbi Yossi. So rather, this opinion is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. The Tanan we learned, the halacha is, as you know, in order to announce Rosh Chodesh, it must be that two witnesses come and testify in Beis Din that they saw the new moon. Now, if the new moon is on Shabbos, we tell the witnesses come anyhow because we need that to be testified. And the halacha is, even when it's clearly seen, whether it is a clearly seen moon or only maybe some people saw it, nevertheless we say come and break Shabbos in order to have the new moon pronounced. Rabbi Yossi, however, Rabbi Yossi says no. If it is not necessary, we don't break Shabbos, and so we want to say similar over here. Once you've separated and you're done with the mitzvah, there's no need for it anymore. And if there's no need, you don't do it. So the Gemara says, how can you compare the two? Because really, the entire concept of breaking Shabbos for the testimony is not necessary in this case, because everybody can see that the new moon has come. Whereas over here, by Bris Milah, you already have the mitzvah to break Shabbos for the bris. So perhaps you can even go back. So how can you compare the two? Shabbos is made to be pushed aside for it. So perhaps you may indeed push it aside. And even for the tzitzin she'ena ma'akvin, even for these extra fringes. It is the opinion of the Chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Yossi. And here we come to the showbreads, the lechem hapanim. The lechem hapanim were breads that were made every Friday, and on Shabbos they were put onto the table. and they were stacked in 2 columns of 12, of 6, a total of 12. And there is a machlokas of how exactly you would clear them, because the Torah says lechem upon alfanai tamid. It must be the showbreads that are on my table always. So what does always mean? So the one opinion says that one group of kahanim would come in and slide the breads on the table, while another would slide the old ones off, and so the table they would simply move along one with the other, and so the table always had the breads on them. Whereas or do we say no, that the kahana would take one off and put the next one on, because if it's happening immediately after, that's also constant. It doesn't have to be that they're sliding along and one is moving the other. So Tanabanan, the Tanan we learned, Arba kahanim nechnasim, 4 kahanim would walk in with the showbreads. Shnai miyadam shnei sedarim. 2 of them were holding 2 columns of 6 breads, one on top of the other. And 2 of them had the 2 vessels that had the frankincense, which also went on the table. And there were 4 that would go ahead in front of them. 2 to take the columns of bread off, and 2 to take off the 2 vessels that have the frankincense in it. In other words, they'd have to slide one from the next. Those that were coming in would stand on the north side, while facing the south. And those that were taking it out were standing on the south side, facing the north. And these would slide them in, and these would slide them out. And this is the way you took the showbreads out, and the other bread, the last week's breads, were going out while the new ones were coming in. And the depth, they were a tefach thick, these breads. So the tefach of one was right against the tefach of the other, and they would slide across this way, and that's the way they would take them out. Because it says, always in front of Hashem, and they always have to be on the table, so the table must be constantly full. However, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no, even if some would take them off and then the others would put them on, it also counts tamid. So Rabbi Yossi holds the fact that you stopped something for a moment doesn't mean it's a stop. So too, by the bris, he holds that you stopped for a moment. It doesn't mean that you've stopped and you can go back and fix up the jagged edges that are there. However, the Chachamim say, no, it must be consistent and constant. If there's any break, it's no longer a continuation. So too over here by the bris, if once you completed the bris and you stepped away from that and you stopped doing the bris, the fact that you if you go back, that would be breaking Shabbos by going back and completing the bris that is not actually an integral aspect of the bris. Taner Rabbanan, the Brisa taught, you have to make the bris complete, meaning make sure that it is the edges, the fringes that the jagged edge that the moil left and didn't do a good job, which is covering the majority of the ridge, which makes the bris incomplete. You have to go back and do that, and if not, it's kares. It is a punishment, a severe punishment of kares, of the soul cut off from its source. So Mani, whose opinion is this? So not whose opinion. Who is getting this punishment? What was done wrong here that needs this punishment? So Rav Kahana says, Uman, the moil, because on Shabbos he did a bris incomplete. Well, if he didn't do a complete bris, so then the only reason you can do this, which is essentially a prohibition on Shabbos, is because you're doing the mitzvah. If you didn't complete the mitzvah, so then you didn't do that. Then you had no right to break Shabbos. Maskefla Papa says why? Uman lema luhu. Why didn't the moil say to the parent, "Ana avdi palga the mitzvah"? I did part of the mitzvah. Now you complete it. Atun avdi palga the mitzvah. You do the other part. Elmer Papa, rather Papa says godol. It means when this child grows up and his bris is incomplete, he is kares for not completing the bris. Well, that we don't need a special teaching. We already know. A male that is uncircumcised, who doesn't go ahead and do the circumcision for him, his soul is cut off. He gets kares. So you're right. We're talking about the moil. But why can't he say to the parent, well, go ahead and you complete the bris which I started? It's right at the end of Shabbos. And they tell him you won't be able to finish the bris. No, I'll be able to do the bris before Shabbos ends. And he did it, but he did not complete it. He did a wound that didn't end up being the bris, a mitzvah, and therefore he gets kares. So to conclude, we see that there's a machlokas of whether you go back once you've completed the bris. Do you go back for the parts that are non-integral? But for the parts that are integral, you must go back, because otherwise you've done a half a mitzvah, which is not the mitzvah, and therefore you've broken Shabbos by not doing a mitzvah and doing a wound. We continue towards the bottom of Kuz Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis 133b. Motzitzik. So the Mishnah said also that you have to do suctioning. Amar Rav Papa said, "Hi umna delimayitz sakana." A moil who doesn't do the suctioning it's a sakana. It's a danger, because they didn't have a system for sanitizing the instruments, particularly that they did a bris with, and or the surface itself or the body itself of the child would not necessarily be clean. And so in order to make sure that no infection goes in, they would suction out the blood in order to make sure that when they bandage, it's already been out. And if you don't do it, the blood has come out. And if not, it's endangering the child. And therefore, if a male doesn't do this suctioning, you remove him from his post. Pshita. And Marcel, of course, if you're allowed to do this suctioning on Shabbos, which in and of itself is breaking Shabbos, that means it must be that an integral necessary part. If it's an integral necessary part, it must be that it's dangerous not to do. No, Sigmar says, no, maybe the blood over there is not being suctioned out from the veins and from the internal of the body, but rather there's sort of like a balloon of excess blood there. And as soon as you make the incision, that comes out. No, it's really a part of the body, and you're pulling it out, suctioning out, and therefore it's a necessity of Shabbos. It is a prohibition of Shabbos, but a necessity of Shabbos because it is for the child's healing. And it's similar to the bandage and the cumin, which is used as a congealing agent. Ma ispalanes a cumin kiloyavet, just as the bandaging and the cumin are there for the child's health, and if not, it's dangerous. So too over here, if he doesn't do this suctioning, it also is dangerous because the child can get infected. And you put on this bandaging. So Abaye said, my mother said, and we've seen this many, many times. Abaye's mother was a healer, and he would quote many things in her name. And even though it was not his mother, it was his stepmother who raised him, because his mother died in childbirth. So Abaye said, my mom said, Ispalnisa the kulon kivi, the best healing for all ailments is shavminai tarba v'chad kira. Seven fat smeared material with one wax. Rabba Amar kira v'kalba. Rabba says wax and kalba, and here the next word is actually a mistake. It's from Rashi, and it's an old French word, resin. And kalba is resin that comes from a tree. So to have wax and resin. Darsha Rabba Mechuza. Rabba announced these ailments that in Mechuza that Abaye said, this is in the name of his mother, here are some healing agents that you should use. Kar'inu b'nei Minyumi Asa, the children of Minyumi the doctor, tore lemenayu, his clothing. They got mad at him and they pulled out his garments, saying, "You're ruining our business because you're telling everybody all of the remedies." No, I left you one remedy that you can keep for yourself. The Shmuel said, "I'm on the mashi ape v'loy nagiv tuva." Somebody who washes his face and doesn't dry it well, niktur lechas benisa. His face is going to get chapped and it's going to be hard and crusty. Maita kante, and how do you heal that? Limshi tuva b'mayda silka. He should wash his face well with borscht, with beet water. We're now Kufla Madal and Amar Aleph 134a. So the Mishnah had said if somebody did not grind up the cumin before Shabbos, which is necessary, so you should put it on Shabbos. So you should grind it on Shabbos. How does he grind it? He grinds it by biting on it with his teeth. Nevertheless, things that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos for a bris, you're allowed to do on Yantif. You're allowed to grind up the cumin. And you're allowed to whisk up the wine and oil. Abai said to Rav Yosef, why are you allowed to grind the cumin on Yantiv? Because you can use it not only for medicinal purposes, but you can also use it for food. You can use it for a pot, the spicing your food. Well, on Shabbos you could use you can whisk up the wine and oil because you can use it for an ailing person. The Tani will learn as we learned, the first opinion says you may not whisk up the wine and oil on Shabbos. But Rabbi Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Meir, that even oil and wine may be whisked up for a sick person on Shabbos. So if you can do it for a sick person, then you can do it for the bris as well. Once Rabbi Meir had a stomach ailment, and we wanted to whisk up wine and oil for him on Shabbos, and he didn't allow us to. So we said to him, wait, but you're the one that said it's okay. You're in your own lifetime, you're going to negate your own teaching? Amar Lanus, he said to us, it's true. I do hold that it is permissible, and that is the way I teach. However, but my friends, they are of the opinion that it is prohibited. And I've always, my custom has always been that I never transgress the words of my colleagues. So even though I hold that it's permissible, and that's the way I teach, and indeed that is the halacha, nevertheless, I myself will not transgress my colleague's opinion. Who knew the machman of shay? So he was strict for himself. But for everyone else, it's permissible. So if it's permissible to whisk up wine and oil for a regular ailment, so then for a bris you can do it as well. So Gemara says no. No, there is a distinction. When you whisk it up for a sick person, it doesn't have to be mixed well. You just mix the oil and the wine, just a rough mixing, and that's sufficient. For a potion on top of a bris, that requires a solid whisking. So for a bris also, mix them up, but don't mix them well. Indeed, that's what the Mishnah means when it says he puts each one separately. You put them together as one, but separately where you didn't really whisk it up well. So we continue on 134a, Kuf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. This is about 8 lines into the wide lines. One of the principal malachas at Shabbos, the Avos malachas, is borer. Actually, maraked is really what we're dealing with. It's separating, selecting the good from the bad, or the bad from the good, with a vessel made for that, such a colander or a sieve. So if you have mustard seed, you may not sift it in its sifter, which essentially would take some of the the seed itself that you want to eat from the husk that's there. So you ground up your mustard seed and you want to separate them. You may not sift it. You may not sift it on Shabbos. Similarly, you may not sweeten it with the coal. So what does that mean? With a hot coal. So I'm going to buy Rav Yosef. How is it different than what we're going to learn later? In a few days, we're going to learn. If somebody already has the mustard in the sifter, you can take an egg and break it on a raw egg and break it on the mustard, and the yolk, which is runnier, will run through the sifter and bring along with it some of the mustard seed, and the egg white, which is thicker, will remain above the sieve in the sifter, and retain the husk there. And even though they're really both edible, but what you want is the mustard seed coming through with some of the egg egg yolk, so that it'll give it some color, and that's what you prefer in the separation. It says over there, it doesn't really look like you're separating, because you're going to both of them are edible. And you're eating both the egg white together with the mustard husk are going to be eaten just separately, and the mustard seed with the egg yolk is also going to be eaten. So you're just separating two good edible things. So that's not the borer. That doesn't look like you're separating. You're selecting, because selecting has to be that you want one and not the other. One's good, one's bad. But over here, it looks like you're separating, because you don't have the egg there. You just have the mustard seed, and some of it's coming down and some of it is remaining above. And even though that really isn't properly borer, because both are edible, but you want the separation, and it looks like you're separating the good from the bad with a device which is prohibited. And you may not sweeten it with this coal. So what does that mean? But we learned that you are allowed to sweeten it with a coal, so it's going to depend what kind of coal. Basically, gachelis is when you heat something up red hot, and it can be metal, and it can be wood. Wood turns into ash coal, and metal just becomes hot, but then it cools back into its proper shape. It depends. With wood, it's prohibited, because actually, when you make a coal out of wood, so when you extinguish that fire by putting the mustard seed, throwing it in the mustard seed, you actually have created a wood coal, which is great for reigniting a fire. It's good kindling. Whereas metal, you haven't created something, and we know in order to be a Torah prohibition, extinguishing a fire on Shabbos, for it to be a Torah prohibition, you have to be productive. And the productivity would be in creating a coal. But with metal, you're not creating a coal. It was metal before. It got hot, red hot, and now it's back to its original state. Whereas in wood, because of the carbonization, you've actually created a coal, a new product. You've been productive in creating something that will light easier. How's it different than throwing a piece of meat on a coal, which on Yom Tov you're allowed to do? There's no other way of doing it. Over here, by the mustard, there is another way of doing it. You can use metal and not wood, and therefore you're not allowed to use the wood. Are you allowed to make cheese? So as we were talking about Yom Tov, can I make cheese on Yom Tov? He says you're not allowed to. How is it any different than kneading? And on Shabbos you may not knead, but in Yom Tov you're allowed to knead a dough in order to make bread. There, the reason is this, because, and this is really comes to the heart of what we were talking about. Anything you can do beforehand, you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So for a mitzvah, if I can do it before Shabbos, I can't do it on Shabbos. I can bring the knife before Shabbos. I can't do it on Shabbos. The bris has to be done on Shabbos. I'm allowed to do it on Shabbos. Yom Tov is similar, not in mitzvah, but in the permission that the Torah gives us to cook and ignite a fire for things that are necessary for Yom Tov. So I can cook food. Well, what about doing something that I could have done before Yantiv? That's not appropriate. Baking bread, it's better fresh bread. So I could have kneaded the dough yesterday. True, but then it wouldn't be good anymore today. So therefore, I'm allowed to do it on Yantiv. But making the coal for my mustard, it could be done beforehand. Making the cheese, that could have been done beforehand. So that's what we say. You want to know whether I can make cheese on Yantiv? No, you may not. Well, how's it different than kneading your dough? Kneading your dough needs to be done on Yantiv because if I did it beforehand, it would not be as fresh. Cheese is good. In fact, it's even better as it ages a little. One second. But in the Hardai, they said that cheese on its first day is great. That's what they mean to say is even on its first day, it's good. Cheese, even fresh right as you made it, would be good. But the longer you keep it, the better it is as it ferments and gets better. And therefore, making cheese on Yantif is prohibited because that cheese making process could have been done yesterday. So we talked, described it briefly when we learned the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you can't make on Yantif a garment for the wound. Basically, in order to keep the wound sealed and to keep the under membrane, which was peeled back down beneath the glands. So they would make a bandage basically out of a sleeve, essentially, a cloth sleeve. So Abaye again quotes his mother, who was a healer, and she said, "Hi cholak the yanuka, this sleeve that's put on for a baby, lepani lesitra leiloi, turn the edge upward, dilma midbagar demine, because maybe the edges will stick to the wound, and when you pull it out, it can damage the urethra, and cause the child to have a torn urethra, which would make it infertile." She made she would make this bandage, this sleeve that she would do. She would make the seam folded inward into sort of like a tube. She would fold it inside out. So this way, there was no edge on the outside, which can stick to the wound and injure the baby. If there is no sleeve that you can put on the baby that would help this wound heal, so laisi belita, take worn out clothing. The isle shifta, this worn out garment that has some the edge, and turn the edge out towards the outer side, or really fold it in so it's not going to stick to the wound. And bandage it up towards the top, and this way it'll be folded on the glance itself, not by the wound, and it won't injure the baby. It won't stick to the wound. And Abaye said, my mother's taught another tactic for the baby. If there's a baby that its rectum is not open and you can't see where the rectum is, so it'll be dangerous for the baby. So basically, there's like a skin over or a membrane over the rectum blocking it. So the shayfi mishcha, so smear some oil in that region, and hold the baby up towards the sun. The sun will shine off of the skin where the oil is. And wherever it looks hollow on the other side, so basically looks see-through, so that's where you would tear it. But how would you tear it in order not to cause damage to the baby? Besarta, use a barley, because that's not very sharp enough to tear this membrane right there where it is hollow on the other side, but not really going to harm the baby itself. And you would cut it, you would tear it both up and down and sideways. But don't use a metal vessel. you shouldn't use that. Because it can injure the baby. It can cause a swelling. Abaya further said, my mother said to me, infant who is not nursing, well, make her daka pume. Its muscles are closed up on account of that it's cold. So they say, how would you heal the baby to warm them up, warm up their facial muscles in order to suck? Well, laisi kasagumri, bring a cup full of coals, metal cup, velinkate lay lahadi pumi, and hold it at a distance, but close enough to the baby's face. The chaim, so this way it'll warm up, pume umayitz, and then that will give it the muscles warmth and life, and mayitz, and it'll begin to suck. Abai said another remedy from his mother. Hayanuka delim min shatye. This child that has a difficulty breathing, so take feathers and fan in front of its mouth, and it'll help it breathe. Abai said another remedy from his mother. This child that doesn't give out breath. In other words, is breathing very lightly. So take some of its amniotic sac and smear it on it, and it'll breathe better. And my mother said, "Hayanuka the cotton, a child who is too skinny, too small. Laisi lasilta the ime, bring the amniotic sac. But smear it on the child or roll it on the child, but from the narrow side to the wider side of the sac. The alaman, if the baby is too oversized, then lay it out and smear it on the baby from the wider side to the narrow side. My mother said to me, Hayanuka the sumak, a child that is very red in the skin. The blood is not circulating properly, and it's too stuck at the surface and the capillaries. It's at the surface of the muscle. So litrachale ad ivla. So therefore, you have to wait for the child until it gets absorbed properly. And only then should you do the bris. The yarik, and a child that is yellow, so that means the blood is not circulating well and is not coming in properly. So you have to wait until the color, the yellowness goes away, so that the baby is healed and the blood is going through him properly. And then you can do the bris. The Tani we learned. We have a brisa that two such occurrences happened. Rabbi Nassan said, "Pamachas," and this happened once. Malachti lekroche and went to the islands. Uvas isha achas, and a woman came to me. Lafanai shamala bana rishon umeis msheni umeis. She had two sons already that had a bris and died immediately after the bris, tragically. And then shlishi eviyosef, and she had a third son, and she brought it to me and said, "What should I do? Should I do the bris? Should I not?" And she brought the baby to me, and I saw that it was very red. So I said to her, wait until he gets his proper color, and the blood will, properly circulate. And himtina, so she didn't do bris on the 8th day, and she waited until his blood was properly absorbed and spread throughout his body. Yamala, I say, did the bris. Then, and indeed, the child lived. And they named the child Nasan Abavli for me. Another time I traveled, I went to this place, Kaputkia. And a woman brought her baby before me. So she too had the first son, bris was done and died, and the second son of bris was done and died tragically. And now she has a third son, and she brought them before him and said, "Should I do the bris or not?" I saw he was very yellow. I looked at him, I did not see a color of the pinkish color that you would see when somebody had a healthy blood circulation. I said to her, wait until his blood circulates properly, until he's healthy. And she waited for him. And then they did the bris, and he lived. And the baby was called Nasan Abavli for my name. We turn to Kufla Medalad base 134b, and the Mishnah says that you can bathe the baby as a part of the healing process, both before the bris, for the health of the bris, and even after the bris. And the Gemara is going to tell us later, this means even warming water on Shabbos for this bath. And the first opinion says that you would spritz the water by hand. You wouldn't put the baby in the bath, but rather spritz some water on him. But you can't use a vessel. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says you can actually wash the baby on the third day. Shechali is b'Shabbos, even if the third day is Shabbos. Now, does that mean that the first opinion says you may not wash even the first day, or you may not wash on the third day, but the first day you may wash? So that we'll see in the Gemara. And what's the idea of the third day? Shenemar, as it says, when the brothers Shimon and Levi, in trying to save their sister Dinah, who had been kidnapped and raped by Shechem, so they said, okay, everybody has to do, they came up with this scheme, everybody has to do a bris, and on the third day, when everybody was reeling in pain from arriving in pain from the bris, and they could not really fight back, they came in and slaughtered the city. So it says over there, that was on the third day that they were in pain. So you see, the third day is painful, and therefore the third day you may bathe. Even the third day you're allowed to bathe the babies. Now the Mishnah says, what about a suffix? If we have a doubt whether the bris should be done on Shabbos or not, such as the Gemara is going to tell us, when the baby was born immediately right before Shabbos, or right as Shabbos came in, and so we don't know, was it still Friday or was it already Shabbos? And if it was still Friday, so I can't do the bris on Shabbos because maybe the baby was born before Shabbos, and therefore it would be the eighth day would be Friday, and doing the bris on Shabbos means that it's not in the correct time. And as we learned, you can only do a bris on Shabbos if it is the exact eighth day. But if it's after that, you cannot do the bris on Shabbos. So if you have a doubt, androgynous, or if the child is androgynous, it has both male and female genitalia. So you cannot do the bris on Shabbos because we don't know whether there's an obligation to do the bris on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda matam androgynous. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you may do the bris on Shabbos for an androgynous. So the Mishnah says, wait, you said at the first line that you can bathe the baby. And then you say you spritz water with by hand. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Baravua Amrit Avayu. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Baravua, they explain Ketzad Tani. The Mishnah means, how do you bathe this child? By spritzing water on him. How do you do so? That you can spritz water by hand on the baby. But you can't use a vessel. Amar Rava said no. It says in the Mishnah you can bathe the baby. Rather, Rava says, this is what it means. On the first day after the bris and right before the bris, so the day of the bris, before and after, you can bathe the baby in a proper bath. Kedarka, normally. How about the third day, when the baby will be quite a bit healed already? Can you still bathe the baby if it was on Shabbos? So let's say the bris was on Thursday. So Friday, Shabbos, third day of the bris, you want to bathe the baby at Shabbos. So there we says, you can only spritz water by hand, but not in a vessel. And to that, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, no. You can even continue and still give a bath to the baby on the third day. If that third day is Shabbos. As it says, because it says that they were still in pain. So Tanika Basida Rava, we actually have a brisa that concurs with Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah, that the first opinion holds you can bathe the baby the day of the bris before and after, And the third day is when you're going to just spritz the baby with warm water. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, no, even the third day, you can still bathe the baby. You can bathe the baby on the first day before and after the bris, kedarka, as you normally would. And if the third day of the bris is on Shabbos, then you would only spritz it by hand. To which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, you can even bathe the baby on the third day, which is on a Shabbos. And even though there's not a solid proof from the Torah, we do have a hint in the Torah towards that. Why? As we see in Shechem, when the people were really ailing from their bris on the third day. So you see, the third day is is still a wound, and therefore the baby can bathe on the third day. And when we say that you spritz on the baby warm water in order to because you can no longer bathe the baby, according to the first opinion, already after the first day, and according to the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, after the third day, you wouldn't use a vessel; you would only use your hand. Also, Tanakama, and that's an opinion that's explaining the first opinion. Now the Gemara analyzes the Brisa. Why do we say there was a hint in the Torah? It seems more than a hint. It says on the third day they were in great pain. So you see the third day is still a pain. So the Gemara says, no, perhaps that's not a real proof. Mishum the Gadol lesalik bisra. Hi, katan salik bisra. Perhaps an adult, the healing takes longer because, and that's the fact that adult wound is going to take much longer to heal. A child, an infant, it heals on its own. And therefore, it's possible that on the third day, it's no longer ailing. And nevertheless, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that on the third day, it's still in pain, it's still ailing, and therefore, you're allowed to bathe the baby on the third day. There was a story that someone came before Rava, who just explained the Mishnah to mean that everybody agrees on the day of the bris you can give the baby a bath. And that's the way he ruled for him. Ichlash Rava, but immediately after that, Rava became ill. Why did I have to argue against the elders who rule differently? Amrulei Rabbanan, so the Chachamim said to Rava, why are you so upset? Rava, but you're right, because the Brisa concurs with you. Amar Luhu, he said to them, it's true, the Brisa is explicit like me, but our Mishnah infers like them. Why? Because look at the wording of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah when he argues on the first opinion. The first opinion said, you bathe the baby, you bathe the baby, and then it says you spritz the baby by hand. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, if that first opinion meant that on the day of the bris you're allowed to bathe the baby, only on the third day is it that you need to spritz by hand and not bathe the baby. When Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah argues, what's the wording he should use? Even the third day, you're allowed to bathe the baby. That's what he should have said, even. But he doesn't. What he says is, you can bathe the baby on the third day. Indicating the first opinion did not take hold of bathing at all. So he's saying two things. You can bathe even the third day. But the bathing part is a new concept, meaning the first opinion, even on the first day held, you can only spritz the baby, but not actually bathe the baby. That's the inference from our Mishnah that the Ravas say. Since he said that you can bathe the baby on the third day, if it's Shabbos. Now, if the first opinion says that you can only spritz the baby with water, therefore he starts off and saying, you can wash the baby. But if the first opinion also said you can bathe the baby, just only on the first day, the third day, you can no longer bathe the baby, you have to spritz the baby. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's response should not be you can bathe the baby. Rather, what he should say is Rather, what he should say is you can even bathe the baby. And since he didn't say that, our Mishnah infers like the elders, and therefore Rava was upset at himself for, even though he held that he was right, and the Brisa concurs with him. Nevertheless, he was upset at himself for having offered an opinion against the elders. and held that and felt that the reason he got sick as soon as he ruled against them was because he ruled against them. Tomorrow morning, Bez Hashem will continue with the